Alright, so here what we're going to be doing is just reviewing. This is actually just a review of the different data types that you'll be able to use in JavaScript. And because we're going to dig into each one of these data types in greater detail in the next couple of lessons. And the thing to remember is that different data types like strings, which we talked about already, which we use for text, numbers, which we would use for numbers, and some of these other data types have powers associated with them. And for instance, if you're trying to find out whether a string has a certain letter in it, that is something that makes sense to use for the string data type. Whereas if you're trying to find out whether a variable is greater than or less than another variable, then you want to use the number data type. And we're going to be going over all of these, what powers are associated, or what are called methods, are associated with specific variables, what properties you can use for specific variables and specific data types here later on. But I wanted to at least introduce the concept. So as you can see, your assignment is just to review the different data types. We've already talked about string. String is a text, and remember we can use either single quotes or double quotes to include the string. Number is pretty straightforward. These are any number, and this can include decimals or not include decimals. A Boolean is a specific data type that just is a true or false value, and we use that later on when we're just trying to say is something true or is something false, and we'll get into Booleans later. An array is when you want to have multiple variables that are associated with the same variable, and the one that I'll use as an example is cars. So an array of cars would be, the variable is cars, but then you might have 50 cars that show up under that, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. An object is sort of is where you're creating a object that you want to reference its properties, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a second as well. Null is when you have a variable and you don't want to have a value associated with that variable. And undefined is a variable that you haven't created or assigned a value to, but you reference it in your programming, and it comes back as undefined. All right, so let's take a look at what we're doing here. A couple other things I want to introduce here are the notion of comments. I didn't really talk about comments in cascading style sheets or comments in HTML 101. I don't really know why I didn't, because it's great to put comments in. And comments are just places that it's a sign to the browser that this is not code, it's not something you want to show, it's just for the programmers to look at. And the way that you create a comment in JavaScript is, if you're doing one line comment, you just do these 2 forward slashes, and then you can see it says here's where I'm defining the objects, and that will be ignored by the browser, both in terms of code and in terms of showing anything. And if I want to have multiple lines, then I do a /*, which is above your 8 on your keyboard, and then that's to start off the comments, and then asterisk / to say that that you're done. Okay, so you can see here I say here's where I'm defining the objects, or in this case actually I'm defining the variables. So what we're going to just do is I'm just going to give you an example of each one. So I created a variable, story name equals, now remember I can do this as var to let you know that you're declaring variables. Var story name equals Superman. So that's pretty clear, right? That's text. That's a string. And then I have one, x equals 3.14, and that's a number. Okay, these are just comments, remember, this is just for us to talk about. And then I'm declaring an object, and an object is something that it's more complex than just a string. Although a string you can use this similarly. An object is when you want to create something and have multiple properties associated with, all of which you define, right? So I create an object called a person, and then I give it the name of John, the age of 34, the height of 6 feet, and I can do that ongoing, and this will become valuable, and we're going to talk about objects a lot more here in a little bit. We're going to talk about all of these things more in terms of how you would use them, but the thing that I want to show you here is that later on I can reference the age of this person because I've created it as an object. And we'll talk about objects more. There are multiple ways to create objects. The one that I did here is I created these curly Q brackets, and then I put in the properties separated by commas. Okay. Here's the next one, which is an array, and this is where I've created multiple instances of the same element. So I have cars, but I want to have lots of different variables, and what we do is we can reference them by their number in the list. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, and if I had 50 in here and I wanted to reference the 37th instance of this car array, then I could, and I'll show you how that works down there. Okay. And so then I'll show you Boolean. I didn't do I did a couple of other ones down here as well. There is a method, or a function rather, called type of, and this is a JavaScript function, and if you put in the specific variable, it will tell you what type of variable it is. So you can see here, story name, that I've created a place on the website called demo. This is a paragraph with the ID demo, and what happens is when I run this function, it writes the inner HTML of demo, and it looks at story name, which is one of my variables, and returns with, what is it? Is it a string? Is it a number? Is it a Boolean? Is it undefined? Whatever. We already know what these are. I just thought it would be fun to run it and see. What is the data type of X? And we know that X is a number, right? It's a number. There's no letters in it. It doesn't have strings. It doesn't have the curly Q. It's not called an array. Whatever. Returns for false. We know that false is going to be a Boolean. Okay, false and true are some of those reserved words. And then it looks at type of for person, and you can see, remember, I have person. It's not just to text. It's not just string. It's a object because it has these curly Q brackets and it has multiple properties. And then I have type of O'Leary, and if you remember, O'Leary is not defined as a variable here, so it's going to show up and say undefined. All right, so let's run that first, and then I'll come back and pop this in. Okay, so you say string, that was my story name, number was X, Boolean was false, object was person, undefined was O'Leary. All right, so the other portion of this that I wanted to do was I wanted to show you how just a quick introduction. We're going to get into this in greater detail. When you start doing things, you're going to start looking for places to store information, and you're going to be looking for how to show text and all that stuff. So here I say document get element by ID car info, right? So I have a little variable place called car info, inner HTML, or a little element here, paragraph ID car info, and I say show me cars bracket 2. Okay, so what that does, cars is my array, and so it looks for the value in the 2 space, and this is kind of a little confusing because this is a 0, this is a 1, and this is a 2. So the BMW, even though it's the third one here listed, it's actually going to show up as number 2. And so it's going to write that value. So, if you had hundreds and thousands of values here, and you just wanted to, let's say, I mean, there's a variety of ways we're going to do this. And once we start evaluating what users enter and clicking buttons and all that stuff, you're going to see how this all works. I just want to introduce the concept of an array. So an array would be multiple values, and you can reference them by their numbered space. Okay? So let's just show that. So you can see here that the BMW shows up. And then the last one is the object. Remember, I created an object called person, and it has properties. The name is John, the age is 34, and the height is 6 feet. And so what I have here is I have document get element by ID person info, so it's going to write here into my paragraph, and it gets the inner HTML, and then look what it does here. Whereas array does cars bracket 2, this says person, which is a variable I created, an object I created, dot age. And so it stores the person's age and creates the name for it, but then I can reference it with person.age. So I'm creating all these variables. This could be whatever it is that I want. And when I click Save Work and Show Web Page, it shows up down here. It shows up down here, rather. All right, so that's just an introduction. All I want you to do is review the different data types. We're going to get into them a little bit more in the next couple of, not a little bit, a lot more in the next couple lessons as you see what you can do with them. And I want to make sure that we do a lot of things, okay? I know that it's fun to click on the buttons and mouse over. And